What's up, everyone? Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. Glad you could be here. And make sure that you follow and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. As you can see, I have a great guest coming on. Dinesh D'Souza is going to be joining me. He's talking about his new film, Police State. Everyone needs to check it out, policestatefilm.net. Dinesh, thanks for coming back to the PAS Report. Always glad to talk to you. And I know this is a movie you hoped you never had to make, but I do think that you were the first victim of the police state, at least one of the first. Is that correct?
Well, you certainly had, in the Obama years, the IRS targeting Tea Party groups. And when my case first came up in 2013, I thought it was a little bit of a private vendetta. In other words, I thought I made this film on Obama, 2016 Obama's America. The guy's a vindictive narcissist. He's in the White House. I thought he called up Eric Holder and said, well, listen, let's go after this guy. And I thought that was an anomaly, an exception. And little did I realize that it was a preview, a prelude to what would happen to Carter Page and Papadopoulos and Michael Flynn, of course, now Donald Trump. So I didn't foresee, I wouldn't say I didn't foresee the expansion of the police state, but I didn't foresee the rapidity with which this expansion would take place and the way in which it penetrates so many of the aspects of our society. It involves censorship, surveillance, political targeting, the effort to create a one-party state, political prisoners. I mean, wow, is there a single feature of police states abroad that we do not now see in the United States?
Yeah, I kind of think we lost the moral authority to preach to other countries about the abuses against their own people when we see what's taking place here in the United States, and it is frightening. Now, when you were doing this film, when do you think it really took off? That you know, the apparatus has been slowly built over a long period of time, but then, as you said, something happened where it just ignited. When do you think that was?
Well, I think that in some ways you could almost see Trump as the fuse. And I say that because it appears that Trump is the underlying pretext for the left throwing out all the norms, all the rules. I mean, just even look at the prosecutions. If they had one indictment against Trump and they go, listen, there's this one serious case where the guy, held on to these classified papers, you'd be like, all right, let's look at that.
But it would be more believable, certainly.
Yeah, he broke the law 91 times and he overvalued his businesses and he thinks that Mar-a-Lago's worth more than $18 million. You step back and you go, well, this is like downright laughable. With Biden, you actually have clear corruption. You have quid pro quo. You have money flow into the Biden family LLCs. You got distribution within the Biden family, the performing the duties for which the bribe payers abroad are paying money. We want to get the prosecutor fired. He gets fired. So there, at least you have a case. You can at least got something to chew on. With Trump, if you ask someone, what did this guy actually do? They're a little hard pressed to say.
And when it comes to someone like Trump, and I think that this illustrates how dangerous the situation is, as you said, it's not just one case. This is a vendetta. This is a seek and destroy mission. Destroy him psychologically and mentally, destroy him financially, ruin him politically. But it's also an attack to his supporters, is it not?
Absolutely. And this is the key. I think in this film, I realize I'm not going to make a film that is only about Trump, because a lot of people are going to say, and I've heard people say, well, Dinesh, I'm not Trump. And I didn't go inside the Capitol on January 6th. So I pay my taxes. I'm a decent guy. I'm not going to have the FBI bang down my door. And so this is a film that's really designed to convince that guy you couldn't be more wrong. In fact, that guy's like the wildebeest who is like grazing lazily in a field. And here I'm trying to be the guy that sees some movement in the trees and is warning the herd that it's in mortal danger. But of course, there are going to be some people who don't listen. And they're like, no, I'm never going to be eaten. I'm going to be eaten last. So this tends to be a little bit of the Republican psychology. And I hope that this film can break through that morass and wake people up.
Well, that's what I tell people. What do you think they're going to do when they're done with one group? I mean, it's not like they're just going to stop there. They're going to move to other groups. Anyone that dissents from their narrative, from their interpretation of how things should be, will ultimately be targeted. Now, one of the things that has me very concerned, and unfortunately, I don't hear a lot of people that talk about it, is the Biden administration's national strategy for countering domestic terrorism that was released in June of 2021. And what this did, it took the idea, we went from violent, anti-government, anti-authority extremists, and the Biden administration dropped the violent part, and they changed extremist to sentiment if you express anti-government or anti-authority sentiment. Now, this is a much different classification than violent anti-government extremists. What are your insights into that?
Well, I mean, this is a movie that tracks, I would call it the genealogy, the emerging story of the police state. And it kind of begins with a bitter irony, which is that, number one, you had these random incidents at Waco, at Ruby Ridge. And you notice that what they did very effectively in those cases was dehumanize the people. So people were like, oh, yeah, it was kind of bad to see all these children and women burning to death. But you know what? They're kooks. They're a cult. So the first step is to make it seem like these people are not like us. They're different, they're strange, and they're vaguely menacing. This was done, by the way, after 9/11. Now, there were a lot of us who supported some of these measures, like the Patriot Act, because we thought, hey, listen, the government needs to have the tools. They need to have some police state powers to go after violent Islamic terrorists from abroad. And of course, the part of the genius of the left was to realize under Obama and now under Biden, let's take those exact same police powers and use them against the very people who gave the government those powers. I mean, this is the bitter irony. We're now going to turn those same weapons against Republicans and conservatives and patriots and Christians. And so in some ways, we have to claim some bipartisan responsibility for helping to create this horrible police state.
And it was obviously short-sightedness on the Republican part, that's for sure. I mean, Patriot Act always had me concerned because the concern is once you deal with the international terrorism and the groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, once they no longer represent that they did the threat that they did on 9/11, well, it's not like the government just dismantles it and says we're no longer necessary. They have to find a new threat. And that new threat, as you said, is an ideological threat, and it's the American people. Now, as far as not just the Biden administration, but the bureaucracy, because Biden's not in charge. Let's face it. He's not making any of the decisions. He's not coherent anymore. Who in the bureaucracy, how deep does this go?
Well, first of all, let's take note of the point that you just made, which is that in every other police state, at least in the world today, it's very obvious who's in charge, right? In Cuba, it was Castro. Now in China, it's Xi. To the degree Russia's a quasi-police state, okay, Putin's in charge. But we don't know who's running our police state. Isn't that amazing? We're a democratic society, and yet, as you say, Biden's in the canoe. I think he's willingly going along, but he's not steering the canoe. That's pretty obvious. So the police state is being run by people other than Biden. The bureaucratic element that you're mentioning is really important, I think, for this reason. And that is that I think the ordinary American has trouble understanding why an FBI agent, who's basically a decent guy, he's got a family, he lives in a 3-bedroom home. How can you get that guy, a basically good guy, to do evil things? How do you get him to go kick down the door of a 68-year-old grandmother in her apartment, grab her, throw her to the ground, twist her arms behind her back, put handcuffs on her, drag her outside, let the neighbors come out and gloat? I mean, how can you do such a barbaric thing? And the answer is the police state is very clever at instrumentalizing its actions. In other words, it never tells the FBI guy, listen, we're on a political witch hunt. We're out to get all the people who opposed us in the 2020 election. You tell the FBI agent, listen, we're going to identify bad people, and your job is just to go and get them. We will then deal with them. That's not your problem. It's not your responsibility. You just need to focus on the fact that if you do this, you're going to get a bonus. You're going to get a promotion. Your pension is going to be secure. Don't worry too much about Islamic radicals right now. That's not our priority. If you want to advance in the bureau, keep using the words January 6th, because that's where our priorities are. That's where your priorities need to be. So the writer Hannah Arendt used the phrase a long time ago called the banality, meaning the ordinariness of evil. And this is something that comes through in this movie. How do you get good people to do really bad things?
And I think we're witnessing that, because what we see is that you have a whole bunch of field agents that are willing to go along with this. And a lot of it stems from the intelligence component within the FBI, something that was built out after 9/11 to try and prevent future attacks. And you have a lot of I'll say kids, right? They graduate college. It used to be that the FBI, you had to be a little bit older for them to even consider you for employment, because they wanted you to have real world life experience. Now they take kids fresh out of college that they can mold and shape in any which way they want. And many of these kids that have gone to the Ivy League schools have already been indoctrinated with the belief that anyone that disagrees with them is a right-wing extremist, is a fanatic, is a domestic terrorist. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, and I think this is also a way of illuminating that unlike other police states, which tend to be police states with the power all concentrated in a central government. Think, for example, about Goebbels, Minister of Propaganda. He says, let's publish this tomorrow in the newspaper, and all the newspapers follow suit, because if you don't do it, you're going to be arrested. Interestingly, in our police state, we've got an octopus that stretches across the public and the private sector. It involves academia, it involves the media, it involves nonprofit groups, it involves digital platforms. So in some ways, I don't like the phrase deep state, because deep state implies everything is in hiding. But no, just go to YouTube, read the YouTube guidelines. They will tell you very, very clearly that if you disagree with them about abortion or climate change or the trans issue or election fraud or COVID, you're going to lose your whole channel. So that's not something hidden. That's right out there in the open.
And let's face it, I mean, President Biden gave that dark speech where he declared half the country the biggest threat to the republic since our founding, labeled them domestic terrorists. And he didn't write the speech. He just said the words from the teleprompter. His staff wrote the speech. And people need to realize that when a president is going to give a speech, that speech is looked at by over a dozen individuals, that they're looking at that speech. And so they know exactly what they're doing. Now, what happens if you're part of this bureaucracy and you speak up against the abuses of the police state, as some have done?
Well, the police state doesn't tolerate any dissent, and in fact, it won't ultimately tolerate even dissent from the left. Because there are people now on the left and they go, well, Dinesh, I'm not being censored and I don't think the FBI is going to come to my door. And I say, you're right. That you are right, at least for now. And why? Because you are helping to build the police state. So police states need constituencies to build them while they are under construction. We don't have a full-fledged police state. We're a police state under construction. And the Democrats and the left are needed in order to build the police state. This is why, by the way, our police state has an open border. Most police states don't have an open border. In fact, it's almost a defining feature of a police state. It has some kind of a Berlin Wall. Can't get in, can't get out. So why do we have an open border? Because the Democrats realize the country is too narrowly divided. They don't have enough of a majority to be able to say, this is the way it's going to be. They need the kind of majority that FDR had, let's say in the 1930s or in the early 40s, where the Republican Party is just a token opposition. It's an ineffective, kind of a submissive party. It does the bidding of the Democrats. And so that's really what they're aiming for. This is why Trump is such a menace to them, is because he simply refuses to go along.
But isn't the Republican Party a token party now? I mean, when you look at it.
Well, yes and no. I mean, it is a token party, and yet it's all we have. And so I'm not one to sort, I feel like this is a case where we have to work with what we got. We still have institutions that can block the police state. We need to use our power. Part of the job of my film here is to be a sort of a sober wake-up call to the American people, and particularly to the people who can do something about this police state to stop it.
I think it's so important what you're doing, because what you see is our government apparatus that's now emulating communist China. And people need to realize that our big tech firms here were the impetus behind China's great firewall and behind the social credit system that's now being imported into the United States. Now, I'm in academia. I've been in academia for quite some time, and I find it astounding when you have academics that openly will write articles and they'll teach their classes that, something like freedom of speech is a defect of the Constitution, that the founding fathers never really intended freedom of speech the way we think. And they're almost reframing the entirety of what the United States is built upon, but more important, our national identity. Now, you came to this country to build from the American dream and adopt. What does the American national identity mean to you?
Well, let me put it this way. When I came to America, I began to learn about American politics, began to learn that this abundant free society that I had come to was the product of a sort of architecture. In other words, it was built this way by the founders. And as I began to learn about the founders, I realized that they they identified certain liberties that are not up for political negotiation. Now, the Bill of Rights is not a comprehensive account of all our rights, but on the other hand, it spells out some rights pretty clearly, right? There's a right to free speech, right to freedom of the press, right to conscience, right to petition the government for redress, right to equal justice or equal rights under the law. Now, my point is, wow, it was designed in a way that 90% of people should not be able to take away yours or my First Amendment rights. 90% of people, even a huge majority, shouldn't be able to dictate your conscience or mine. And yet here we are in America, and all these rights I've just enumerated are now in serious jeopardy. So this is not the America that I came to 3.5 decades ago. Essentially, what we've seen is a kind of free fall away from a kind of empire of liberty now toward something that is not that far away from an evil empire.
And why do you think that free fall happened? Like, what happened to the America? You know, prior to the coronavirus, there are things I would always say that would never happen in America. We would never go that far. The American people would never tolerate something like that. And yet they did. Like, it was shocking. I mean, they tolerated lockdowns. They tolerated being told when, where, and how they practice their faith. They tolerated the government dictating who could come into your home, who can, what you must wear when you leave your home. I was shocked at that. So when did the mindset of the American people change, at least in your opinion?
I think there are two phenomena that seem to have occurred simultaneously: the gangsterization of the Democrats and the sort of, the wussification, the timidity of the Republicans. Now, the Democrats weren't gangsters in the Jimmy Carter era, and the Republicans were not this timid in the Reagan era. But what happened somehow is that the Democrats realized that all these liberties, and by the way, some of them had fought for in the 60s and 70s. Yeah. They were the party of free speech. But it turns out that apparently what their real view was not that they believed in free speech in principle, but free speech for them. So the moment that they gained power in the university, they began to say, well, we don't believe in free speech for anybody else. But see, take away their free speech and they will discover the virtues of free speech overnight. All you have to do is grab an academic and tell him to clear out his desk and move his stuff onto the street, and he's screaming academic freedom, right? So they discover the virtues of freedom when it applies to them. When Elon Musk suspended a bunch of liberal reporters for one day on Twitter, they went nuts and they were all quoting John Stuart Mill and freedom of speech. So they are very protective of their own freedoms, even as though they're happy to deny those same freedoms to others.
Yeah, it's always amazing. And I say, like, you know, when they do the public virtue signaling, they should have to sign a pledge to live. So if you want the open borders, you should have to sponsor a family, bring them into your home, shelter them, feed them, put them on your health insurance, and then we'll see how many of them actually believe what they say. But they're all frauds. Now, as far as Republicans go, what should Republicans in Congress be doing right now as far as it goes? Now, I understand they're limited. They don't have the Senate, and obviously Biden will veto anything that they get into him anyway. But what should the Republican talking point be? Because I think that this is the biggest election issue. This is the thing that I'm most concerned about. So what should Republicans be discussing in Congress, and what should they be discussing campaigning-wise?
I think Republicans need to take two issues. One is the integrity of the elections, and the other is the police state, and put those issues on the ballot. And that means talking about them all the time, which is to say, exposing the gangsterization of the other side, exposing its police state tactics. Now, Republicans tend not to do this. And so, for example, the Republicans in Georgia are very scared to call out Fani Willis, because they fear that Fani Willis will turn around and say, you know, no one is above the law. And the Republicans go, oh yeah, no one's above the law. We can't really raise any issues because we're interfering in a prosecution. We got to realize that the Democrats do not respect these boundaries at all. And so part of the aggression of the left is motivated by the timidity on the right. There's so many Republicans who say we cannot do to them what they're doing to us. We are better than them. We stand on principle. So they try to pack the court, but we're not going to pack the court. We are ideologically committed to 9. And so the Democrats are like, great, we'll try to pack the court. But if we fail, no problem, because those idiots are not going to try to put 17 members on the court and obliterate and have a permanent majority. In other words, until we recognize that we are in a very perilous situation. It's sort of like going out west in a covered wagon and you've got all these outlaws and they want to burn your homestead down. And you say things like, I'm going to write a strongly worded op-ed in National Review online. And no, that's really not going to do it.
Well, and that's such a good point. So, to highlight that, you had Senator Rand Paul actually advance an amendment barring the government from contacting Twitter or Facebook or any social media company to censor things. And Mitt Romney, like, ripped into Senator Paul saying, well, no, that's unfair. The government should be allowed to contact the social media companies and dispute what stories they think is false. And I'm just sitting there like, well, why do we need Democrats as opposition when we got people like Mitt Romney?
Well, and not to mention the fact that, look, I mean, there is a Missouri versus Biden case, as you know, that's kind of making its way to the Supreme Court. I think ultimately the Supreme Court will
And a
step
lot
in.
of information has come from that case.
Yeah, a lot of information has come out from that case, but the process moves glacially. And what happens in the meantime? Millions of people are shadow banned, deplatformed, not allowed to speak. Elections come and go, and this case is kind of slowly rolling its way to the Supreme Court. So part of it, I think, here is that we just need to see a stepped up momentum, a stepped up sense of urgency. I mean, this movie, the advantage of a movie, I think, is you and I can talk about this all day, and the ordinary American will listen and go, yeah, but, it's not going to happen to me. Or, yeah, but they have no sense of what that actually feels like. But the good thing about sitting in a theater or watching this movie at home is you see the battering ram and you see the door fly open and you see the agents heavily armed come in. And so we're bringing the police state to you, so you recognize this is not a direction in which we as Americans want to go.
And outside of that, so when you watch the movie, it's so important that you're highlighting this. But you're limited in what can be done, right? You need power. You need to win elections in order to fix the election system. You need to win elections in order to fix the ideological corruption within our government and the weaponization of our politics. As far as ordinary people go, what can they do to try and push back against this idea of a police state, the encroachment of authoritarianism throughout our society?
Speak up. Help get the word out, participate in elections, become a poll watcher if you have the time, become an election observer if you can, put pressure your elected representatives to act. I mean, you're right. Ultimately, power has to be exercised through institutional bodies. And by that, I mean, not just the Republicans in Congress, but judges, people on courts, Republican secretaries of state, attorneys general. There are a lot of Republican attorneys general in states around the country. Here's my question. Why haven't they indicted a single prominent Democrat? Is it because Democrats haven't committed indictable offenses? No, it's because Republicans tend to say, well, I don't want to do that. That's going to make me look political. I don't want to indict Hunter Biden, even though he was collecting money in this state. I'm not going to indict Mayorkas for child trafficking, even though there are kids being trafficked in my state. So my point is there are opportunities for them to take action. And my point is they need to use your power.
And that's fundamentally important. Now, I believe Police State premieres October 23rd, correct? The week of
we
October
bought out
23rd?
Hundreds of theaters on 2 days, October 23rd and 25th. We're selling the tickets on our website. The website is policestatefilm.net. And then October 27th, Friday, virtual premiere. So if you can't get to a theater, no problem. You can watch at home. It's going to be out of a magnificent theater in Las Vegas, live music. We play the whole film. And then Dan Bongino, who's collaborating with me on this movie, the two of us do a live Q&A to follow. So all of that for the price of a movie ticket. Policestatefilm.net is the website.
And everyone needs to check it out. We'll have links up at the P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com. Dinesh, always enjoy the conversation, and thanks for what you're doing.
I appreciate it.